Well, good afternoon. Top of the afternoon to you. This is past the sleepy time. That was at 2 o'clock. I didn't see anyone sleeping during Dr. Furman's lecture. I hope that doesn't mean you just moved it forward. I'd like to give a shout out to Steve Shore and the staff for putting together this fantastic conference. And in particular, I would like to thank them for the invitation to be among you. You never know when your next teacher will appear. It's when you're ready. So I got up early this morning and came to hear the geologist talk, David Montgomery, and I just listed him as one of my mentors now. I used to say that all we need to practice really good medicine now is a doc. I think we still need a doc, a nutritionist of some brand or another, and a physical therapist. But after hearing David Montgomery's talk, I think probably all I really need is a geologist and a biologist to help me out. So do we need any more bad news about the standard American diet? No, but I do have one bit more of bad news, and that is that Barbie, after 50 years on the American diet, is not doing so well. Let's take a moment to reflect on how we got to where we are. First of all, when I was going to medical school, I wanted to be part scientist, part doctor, and part teacher. I did not want to be a general practitioner. No, that was passé. I wanted to study the new things and teach the medical students and take care of the sick people all at once. And if we remember way back, or maybe some of us will need to remember grandparents' or parents' stories about medicine in the early years, if the doctor came to the house, which they did, and Aunt Minnie was sick and dying, everyone was upset, and everyone was stressed, and everyone was fussing around, and nobody knew what to do. And when the doctor walked in and was able to say, Aunt Minnie has this disease or that disease. I look at the symptoms of short of breath. I look at the blue color of the lips, and I can tell you that she's got congestive heart failure, and I listen to the valve, and it's no good, and she probably has infection in the valve, and we can't get rid of that. Everyone sort of relaxed into the fact that what was wrong with Auntie was known, and what was going to happen was a natural progression for state-of-the-art at the time. And we all sort of relaxed into our roles of either planning her funeral or providing her comfort or fixing food for the last visitors and so on. So a specialist has evolved out of that level of knowledge. So if you look at this tree diagram, at the very top, written among the leaves, is the word rheumatology. And to the left is cardiology, and two more to the left is gastroenterology. That's where I work. And I was going to tell you, according to Steve Shore's introduction, what I'm doing since retiring from what's printed in your bulletin. And I teach a lifestyle medicine class to second-year medical students at the University of Illinois College of Medicine in Rockford. And I consult with some individuals, some groups, and some corporations on how to use lifestyle medicine as a solution to whatever it is they're trying to solve. And I work very hard to be a role model for other 70-year-olds and for my family members. So, back to this story of this metaphor of the tree. If someone had arthritis, and the doctor could tell if the arthritis was rheumatoid arthritis, or if it was related to psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, or if it was wear and tear arthritis, or if it was an infection, or particularly if it was Lyme disease, they were a specialist because they could recognize signs and symptoms in clusters that represented a known condition. Now, in years past, the known condition was as far as we got. You got this, now you know, that's all we can do. But now there's all kinds of things that can be done for someone with arthritis, and so we have an arthritic specialist. When as a gastroenterologist, I became disenchanted with the variety of treatments that we had available, and I took boards in holistic medicine in the year 2000, I became a holistic gastroenterologist, and that meant that I took care of gastrointestinal disease in a way that improved overall health. So what we did for the GI problem would then improve other things. And I learned that from studying Dean Ornish's work, where when he took care of the heart problem, diabetes got better. Wow, what was that about? And then when prostate cancer got better, we really took a hard look and reread the paragraph because we didn't know how that could be. So I had a guy that worked in an office across the street, a friend of mine who was a rheumatologist, and he called me up and he said, Roger, we need to have breakfast because when my patients see you, some of the problems I'm struggling with them get better in spite of what I'm doing. So I want to know what you're doing. And what I was doing was treating the root cause of the disease. So when we look down, we see fundamental clinical imbalances in the upper trunk. And in the lower trunk, we see fundamental physiological imbalances, and further down, genetic predispositions, and finally in the roots, a la David Montgomery. Is he here? Is David Montgomery here? Yeah, okay. Thank you for that tree image that you gave, because down in the roots, great things are happening. So as we begin to treat the root cause of disease, there is a blurring of the specialties, right? People talk about one approach to their lifestyle, and all of these conditions begin to get better. So what's happened is that physicians who are trying to keep up, trying to be the best that they can be, if they are a stent doctor, an invasive cardiologist, they are looking at studies that compare one stent to another. If they put in a stent that doesn't work as good as something that's known and published, well, at worst, they're liable. At best, they haven't done the best job for their patient. And they're behind on reading all the articles about stenting. And if you ask them, what about broccoli? They'll say, that's not in the cardiology literature. But what they mean is, with my time and schedule, trying to have a family life, trying to be a healthy person, I don't see anything on my radar screen that has to do with broccoli and stenting. That's okay, that's where we are. But as Gwen Olson said at the end of her talk, we have to be informed, we have to be experienced, and then we have to become active, at least for our own health, if not the health of the planet and the health of others. So anyway, this is how we got to where we are, and that's all right, because that's the way it always is. When they said the earth was not flat and it was round, people said, no way, we'd all fall off. You know, it's got to be flat. And when they said that the earth revolved around the sun, you could be put in prison for that. So the only way that things change is to be different from the way things are. It's natural. So we're going to talk about the gut as a gateway to chronic disease. And what ways is it so central to our ability to change our health? We're going to talk about healthy digestion and border security and genetic destiny. And unlike David Montgomery's talk that moved so beautifully and linearly from the garden that had bad dirt to the health of the planet and us taken along for the ride without any straying, I will not talk that way. I'll be kind of straying. All right, so gateway, about cholesterol, sources of cholesterol, fat digestion, micelle formation, roll of fiber, lipemic or milky serum, artery disease, and statins versus diet. The other thing I'm impressed with this conference is I've only been here 2 days, and I'm already beginning to hear things over and over again. But the good thing is it's from a geologist rather than a cardiologist, and it's coming at me from a different angle, and so I think that's okay. We repeat ourselves, particularly from our area of expertise. To get us all on the same wavelength, I want to show you a little video, 3.5 minutes, about what is atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. If we polled this audience, some people would say, well, it's rust in your pipes. Other people say it's buildup of calcium. Some people would say cholesterol sticks in your blood vessels like glue. Let's see if we can all get on the same page with this short video.
Of many heart attacks, 40%, the first sign is sudden death. There's not much you can do after that.
I first woke up, so to speak, when I was working on the anesthesia service, learning how to put people to sleep. And I was seeing my patients for the next day's surgery for coronary artery bypass surgery in order to bypass clogged arteries in their heart. Because it was late at night, I drew the man's blood test, and when I took the blood to the laboratory and had it processed, I couldn't believe my eyes. Now, normally, this liquid layer floating on top of the blood clot is quite transparent. It's a yellow, but quite clear. You can see right through it. The blood in this patient's tube, however, was anything but clear. The serum floating on his clot was thick and greasy white. It looked like glue. In fact, it stuck to the sides of the blood tube when I shook the tube. I went back to the patient. I said, "Mr. Phillips, did you eat before you came to the hospital tonight?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What did you have?" He said, "I had a cheeseburger and a milkshake." And when he said that, I realized that what I was looking at in his tube was all the fat in the beef burger, all the butter fat in the cheese, and the butter fat in the ice cream and in the milkshake. And all this fat had oozed out into his blood and actually turned his blood fatty. Well, 30, 40, 50 years of keeping your blood very fatty creates changes in the blood vessels that are very dangerous. Over the years, arteries can become clogged with fatty material. Then a blood clot can form, blocking the blood flow completely. If the artery leads to the heart, the lack of oxygen can cause heart muscle to die. That's a heart attack. If the clogged artery leads to the brain, the patient has a stroke. The next morning, we took Mr. Phillips to the operating room, and I put him to sleep, and the surgeon opened up his chest. And from these arteries, he began pulling out yellow, greasy deposits of fatty material called atherosclerosis.
Can just 30 days bring a drastic...
So, in learning to change, several things have to occur. Number one, we need information that is transformative. Once you get the information, your brain never returns to its former state. And I think little clips like this can bring us from zero to where we want to be. Dr. Furman was talking about some guy that came along to play golf. His wife was going to his conference, and he listened to a couple lectures, and he didn't play golf. He stayed because he heard some information that for him was transformative. So the other thing is that we have to be able to connect the dots. So we connected milky serum with burgers and milkshakes with an obese guy who had glue in his blood vessel. This blood vessel that Dr. Furman was talking about that needs to be getting filled with fresh blood and oxygen during the diastolic phase, right? You all remember that. So here's a picture of this clogged blood vessel, and we now have a pretty good definition in our mind, at least a visual picture and a connecting of the dots of how it gets that way. And if we just bypass it, what happens to the bypassed vessel? It gets the same thing because it lives in the same environment. So the gut, the upper gut, and we're going to use gut as a general term to refer to from mouth to rectum, everything in between, and we'll just call it the gut. But the upper gut, the esophagus, stomach, and small intestine is joined together with the liver and the pancreas to accomplish good things. Here we see a fat globule on the left, a nice yellow fat globule, and it is emulsified by bile salts and broken up into pieces and hydrolyzed into little particles. And they're the blue, and sort of looks like a flag there, is a triglyceride, and pancreas lipase digests that into a monoglyceride and two free fatty acids that look like a string of red pearls. In order for fat to be absorbed, have you ever heard it described that these two people get along like water and oil, like not at all? Well, fat is not water soluble, and what goes into the intestine is water soluble. So fat has to be put together in a unit that is water soluble, and that's called a micelle. And you see it there. It looks like a maypole dance there or something in that circle, but it's got bile salts and monoglycerides and fatty acids and phospholipids and cholesterol all put together in a way that it is water soluble temporarily. And that takes about 5 hours. All of fat digestion might take up to 10 or 12 hours. So Dean Ornish everybody's familiar with Dr. Dean Ornish, Program for Reversing Heart Disease. As a fourth-year medical student at the University of Texas, he observed in epidemiology studies that Asian people did not get our diseases unless they moved here. And then they got them within 5 to 25 years. So he wondered if he put people on an American version of a rural Asian diet, if he could improve their heart disease. And he was stunned by what he learned. And you all know, and I'll just repeat for the record, that that was a 10% of calories from fat, exercise 30 minutes a day, stress management practiced 90 minutes a day, group support, and no smoking. By the way, his study that had these many features involved showing the reversal of heart disease was refused by every journal in America that he submitted it to. It was finally published in Europe in the Lancet. And think about what we know about the way medicine is brought forth in Europe, new things, versus here. In Europe, they don't allow GMO foods unless they've been tested and proven to be safe. And here, we have to label things that are not GMO. I mean, if something's going to be organic, then it has to meet certain standards. And it's just the opposite in Europe. And so no wonder they took his article early, even though he couldn't prove which of these things was making a difference. So if we look at what we've learned from Dr. Furman and others in this conference, we can see a visual image of food in the stomach that is low fiber and high calories versus high fiber and low calories. If it's fiber rich, the calories get diluted, and that's good. Plus the fiber messes up the micelle formation and makes it difficult for fat to be absorbed, and a lot of the fat then goes out in the waste before it can be absorbed. So these images help us understand what we need to do. Now, it was very interesting in the Ornish program that his patients felt better, less angina in 1 week, hours to days, whereas it took a month to see a flow study, a specthallium scan or a PET scan, showing improved blood flow and oxygenation of the heart muscle, and it took a year to show coronary arteries were actually becoming measurably less blocked. So I'd ask you to be thinking about how could the person have clearance of their angina pain in hours to days if it took a year to see the coronary arteries narrowing, being opened up. So we'll watch this video that needs the lights way down to see if we can have some information that is transformative.
For years, Dr. Roy Swank had been interested in the effects of a high-fat diet on blood viscosity. While at the Montreal Neurological Institute, he began to work with hamsters. These small animals are ideal for these kinds of experiments since the circulatory system of their large cheek pouches can be studied with considerable ease. After a fatty meal, the hamsters were anesthetized, and then the cheek pouch was carefully exposed. Using a 50-foot magnification, here is what Dr. Swank observed shortly after the meal. And here is what Dr. Swank observed some 6 hours after the meal, once the fat had been absorbed into the bloodstream. He observed severe red blood cell clumping, which made it difficult for the blood to flow through the capillaries with the usual ease. In some capillaries, blood flow actually came to a virtual standstill, which means that the tissues, the cells, the pouch were no longer receiving adequate oxygen and nutrients. These experiments showed that a high-fat meal was able to impair the oxygen delivery of the red blood cells by causing red blood cell clumping and by slowing down the blood flow. A high-fat diet, then, causes red blood cells to clump. It leads to RBC.
So we could have the lights up. Red blood cells carry oxygen on their sides. If you get a clump of 5 red blood cells together, stuck together, instead of having 10 sides carrying oxygen, you have 2. And the capillaries are one cell thick in size, and you've got 5 trying to muscle their way through the capillary, forming actually a blockade, which would mean there would be no oxygen being delivered. And so we have 60,000 miles of capillaries in the body. And so when you eat a fatty meal over the next few hours, it's sludging, and all kinds of disruptions occur in carrying nutrients to the cells and removing wastes. Here we have a picture from Dr. Esselstyn's book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. Esselstyn and Pritikin and Ornish and Chip and all these folks are really teaching the same thing. But we don't get tired of seeing the results from any one of them. And here's a picture of a coronary artery on the left with a segment outlined in the white swipe that shows a pinched and narrowed segment of coronary artery, and the little stubs coming off to the side are the little smaller arteries that are actually blocked. In 32 months, this 50-year-old chairman of the radiology department at the Cleveland Clinic, where Dr. Esselstyn works, in 32 months he was able to reverse this heart disease after having had 2 bypass surgeries and 4 stenting procedures, and having been told by some of the finest cardiologists in the country that there wasn't anything else that they could do. And so we are impressed with the power of this kind of intervention to make a difference. And with the little video clips, we can begin to connect the dots as to why. Now, Ornish's program is so stunning, and I believe one day he will be nominated for the award for achievement in science, but he's not quite old enough. He showed that heart disease can be reversed. Along with it, its siblings, cholesterol, blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, and other problems. He showed that people can make and sustain these changes by publishing his 5-year studies. More strikingly, he showed that prostate cancer progression can be reversed with the same program that reverses heart disease. And even more strikingly, he showed that it was on biopsies that the genes in the cancer cells actually changed expression with 3 months of diet and lifestyle modification. And furthermore, he showed that telomerases increased, telomeres were lengthened, and telomeres have to do with the longevity of a cell, and therefore with our longevity. So all these things he showed were connected to this one intervention that came out of a medical student's idea of studying epidemiology and trying to make a simple lifestyle change for a group of people. You can read about all this in The Spectrum by Dean Ornish. Here is a picture which I'll have to explain to you. It's called a heat map of genetic activity. On the left panel, there's 30 men, and they are the up and down sets of blocks. Each one of those represents a man whose prostate was biopsied. And in the right panel, you have 30 men, the same 30 men, 3 months later, who had a prostate biopsy again. I'm not sure how eager I'd be to sign up for this study, but I'm sure glad a lot of people did. On the right-hand side, you have all the genes they've selected that illustrate the change. And when the red blocks on the left side turned to green on the right, those were genes expression being turned on or turned off, this case being turned off. And there's a few genes on the right-hand side of that first panel that were green and turned to red. So what he showed was that there were about 450 genes that changed for one direction and about 59 that changed in the opposite direction, and that explained the regression of the prostate cancer seen on PET scan. So this is drilling down. It's one thing to say if you eat a whole foods plant-based diet that you can begin to reverse prostate cancer, but if you can show that the genes are actually being turned on and turned off, that's really important, and that has to do with the third section of my talk today, which is on genetic destiny. So there's the book, The Spectrum. Now, let's talk about the problem of the black box. When I was in medical school, there was a cigarette machine in every sub-waiting room in the hospital. And we were beginning to learn that if you put smoking into the black box, lung cancer came out on the other side. And boy, was there a hue and cry over the fact that we don't know what's going on in the black box. Therefore, we should keep smoking. Right? And then Ornish comes along, and he shows that with 5 simple changes in lifestyle, all of these things changed. And he couldn't get it published, except in the Lancet in Europe, because he couldn't explain which of those 4 things or 5 things was making which difference, and therefore he couldn't explain if some other thing that he hadn't even thought of was actually making the difference, and therefore we should keep eating bad diets. And then when the Ornish program showed that prostate cancer could be reversed, on the right side there is a PET scan showing the prostate cancer, and the yellow is its activity. And he proved by repeating the PET scans that that yellow area shrank. And then he showed on biopsies that it was changes in genetic expression, because food is a cell signal to turn on and turn off genetic expression. We'll talk more about that later. So the black box is always with us. There cannot be anything new without some geologist saying, what's happening in my garden looks like what's happening in my health. And somebody will say, well, you don't know what's doing that, because we can't see into the black box. But as we drill down into the black box, it does help us make progress. So let's look at the statins. We've talked about the statins already today. Statins block HMG-CoA reductase, the enzyme at the top of this flow of enzymatic reactions. And at the bottom, out comes cholesterol, but also CoQ10, or ubiquinol, and also glutathione, which is one of those antioxidants that can give an extra hydrogen ion, an extra electron here or there, or take up one. And can you imagine taking a drug that blocks all those processes? And there's a further problem with the statin, and it's called the McLipitor syndrome. Dr. Mark Goldstein wrote in the New York Times Magazine in 2007 that his patients feel that when he puts them on a statin, they can eat whatever they want as long as they take the statin to lower their cholesterol. So instead of lowering their cholesterol, they actually ate worse, and the cholesterol actually got worse in several of his patients. So he said that's the McLipitor syndrome, and that the doctors don't have the time to really explain and really connect the dots as to what's going on, and that the lifestyle change might be better than drugs, even for other problems like obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure. So, on my return to the University of Missouri, where I completed medical training for the alumni weekend 5 years ago, it was less than that actually, because this was published in 2012. This is Micah and Thifault, professors at the Nutrition Research Department at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, and they looked at 39 individuals with metabolic syndrome risk factors and randomized them to exercise alone, 19 people, or exercise plus a statin, 20 people, for 12 weeks. They exercised 5 times a day, 45 minutes, and simvastatin, 40 milligrams a day for those who were taking the statin. And what he showed was, on the bottom, that in the exercise alone group, the muscles were able to increase their VO2 max or their VO2 peak, the ability of the muscle to take up and utilize oxygen faster and better. And that is a sign that someone is developing muscle ability, endurance, and strength. They're going to be a better triathlete or whatever, or a better walker, whatever they want to do. But the change with the statins, you see on the bottom of the diagram and on the right side, was very, very minimal. So statins block the ability of muscles during exercise to improve their utilization of oxygen. And we also saw on Dr. Furman's slides that it can have effects on the mental status of people. In the American Journal of Pharmacology, we see 18 elderly patients on and off statins with mental function tests showing a measurable cognitive decline on statins. So we're learning then from all of this data that it's really a systems biology approach that we need to understand what's going on. When Ornish says it takes changing 5 things to develop health, it's because everything affects everything else. And I think that's a theme that we've been beginning to hear You know, the geologist talks about what's going on underground, changing what's going on above ground, and we're thinking, whoa, this is really complex. And the next speaker talks about what's going on in the colon is affecting what's going on in the brain, and that's getting really close to home. So if you look at all of these different areas of concern in human health, oxidative stress, hormone imbalance, mind, body, spirit, gastrointestinal status, immune function, increased or decreased, inflammatory status, we realize that everything is connected. And so when we say we don't know what's going on in the black box, it just might be that that would take a while, and that we would get our computers to track the impact of probiotics on lupus or something that's of interest to us, and we would follow it for years as this is unraveled. But back to the cholesterol story and the gut as gateway. If we look at the cholesterol content of animal foods, we can see that looking at milligrams per 100 gram serving of a given food, that it can range from 500 to 45. There's always someone then in the back of the room that lets out a whoop because they see that they really should be eating more ice cream. Only 45 milligrams of cholesterol per 100 grams. But what we really want to see is that on the right side, there's no cholesterol in the plant kingdom, and we know that cholesterol is made in the liver, and that the liver makes the right amount for all the jobs that cholesterol has to do. Cholesterol in the skin, exposed to the sun, makes vitamin D, and cholesterol is the base molecule for making estrogen and testosterone, which we all at one time or another care a lot about. Now, in Rockford, we invited the Ornish program into our community, and we had it for 5 years, and we lost it because there was no funding. It took 20 years from 1990 to January of 2010 for Medicare to agree to pay for the Ornish program, which they now do. Hooray. These things take time. We also brought the CHIP program there, and you heard Dr. Deal speak yesterday. A program that is now available as a DVD series with a textbook and a workbook and a cookbook, and provided by a trained facilitator. But it provides information that is transformative. How do we learn new information? How do we take it in and operationalize it? It happens in various settings: at work, at home, at church, in a community group, or now in an online community group. Dr. Furman was talking about patients helping each other online, and that's what we observed in our classes in Rockford, Illinois, that we're teaching the CHIP program and the Ornish program, that people began to teach each other. There's a guy sitting there that's saying, well, it doesn't really help my blood pressure. And the person stands up next to him and says, I'd like to report that I've been taken off my blood pressure medication now, after it being lowered every other day for a while. And he goes, oh. And he's spoken first, so everybody in the class is going to watch and see when he gets it, when he connects the dots, and he begins to make a change. So, we need a supportive environment, and there's many ways to do that. We randomized 340 people who had paid $300 to take the CHIP class into a group that would wait till October and a group that took the program in March. And we measured all kinds of things about them, including their chemistries and their biometrics and their pedometer readings and their quality of life scale and their Beck depression scale. And we looked at the CHIP group in green and the control group in orange. In green was a measure of their health knowledge test, and it went way up. And the control group didn't do any better on the test than they did the first time because they were waiting to take the class. They were the control group. And look at this. This was one of the most interesting things to me. The control group made improvements in exercise and in lowering the total fat in their diet because they got it. They signed up. They were ready. They were early adopters. They wanted to take the class. They made some changes where they understood how to make the change. If you're a couch potato, you get up, you start walking, you make a change. But look at this. Percent change in calories from protein on the left. Next was fat. Next was carbohydrate. Next was sweets. So carbohydrate and sweets, the last two bars, green, it goes up in complex carbohydrates, and it goes way down in simple carbohydrates or the sweets. But look at the control group in orange. They didn't make changes because they didn't really know how to do it, It hadn't really been explained, even though they were given pamphlets on what to do, and they got a phone call once a month in the control group, which is the usual education coming out of a medical clinic. They could not make the change because they could not really understand what was happening. The percent change in dietary fiber, it goes way up for beans and vegetables and grains and fruit. In the treatment group, taking the CHIP program, and in the control group, no change. They did change in some of the other simpler things. And here on the cholesterol, the group on the right, the green that goes down, is the high-risk group. They were able to lower their cholesterol 43 points, which is typical of what a drug intervention would do. So the point here is the GI tract may be the gateway to these changes, ability to make these changes, but it requires information and it requires a supportive group. So, no cholesterol in plant foods, earlier satiety, filling up sooner, lower caloric density, higher nutrient density, less fat absorption, improved microcirculation, as in the hamster video. By the way, the hamster did fine. I heard some of you moaning for the hamster. He was put to sleep, then he woke up and went and had a nice meal. And opened up blocked arteries. Now, how does this work in groups? Let's take a look at this video that's explaining how the Ornish program worked. Any of you ever been to an Ornish program? Okay, you're going now.
Start with heart disease. All of us have heard that diet and exercise and stress reduction can help prevent heart disease, or at least keep it from getting worse. Well, one associate professor at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco wondered what would happen to patients with the most severe kinds of heart disease if they really followed those recommendations, including a diet of no more than 10% fat. Well, the doctor wasn't surprised by what he found out, but his patients were ecstatic.
I live on a big hill in San Francisco. I used to look at the hill and get a little angina. I figured at 59 I'd be dead because that's when my father passed away.
For 20 years, Hank Ginsburg and his wife Phyllis have been struggling with his heart disease. Then, 7 years ago, he had a 6-way bypass operation. At the same time, Dwayne Butler was first diagnosed with heart disease.
My doctor told me I had some heart problems, and he had some tests run on me and told me I had about 40 to 50% blockage in my arteries, and it really didn't bother me. I just figured I had 50 to 60% left.
2 years after Hank's surgery, 5 of his 6 bypassed arteries closed up.
Doctor said, take care of your insurance. This was before. And don't expect to live to be an older person.
And Dwayne Butler learned his blocked arteries were worse.
But I had 90% blockage that I better do something about it. I didn't want a doctor cutting on me. I didn't want an angioplasty. I didn't want to take pills the rest of my life like my family doctor told me I'd have to do.
Hoping they had another chance, both men signed up for an experiment run by this UC San Francisco professor, Dr. Dean Ornish. He was studying lifestyle changes as an alternative to bypass surgery.
When we deal with the underlying causes, the body can begin healing itself, and even severely blocked arteries can often begin to actually reverse. But if we only literally or figuratively bypass the problem literally with bypass surgery or using newer techniques like angioplasty or drugs, then the same problem often comes back.
Ornish's program was simple: exercise, stress reduction, and a very low-fat diet. What he preaches is not radical. Getting people to do it is.
And I'm not the kind of guy that usually sticks to things like that. I've been on 100 different diets.
I guess if Dr. Ornish would have told me what I was getting into, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it if he would have told me beans and rice, giving up all my meat, my potatoes, my ice cream, my donuts, and those kinds of things.
So, twice a week, Ornish's group gets together for reinforcement and to share a meal prepared by a French chef that meets the program's rules. No more than 10% fat, no meat, no fish, no chicken.
And the conventional recommendations, such as what the American Heart Association and others have been recommending, a 30% fat diet, really don't go far enough for actually reversing heart disease.
And it was very exciting when I started feeling better almost right away, within 3 or 4 weeks.
But in 6 months, I had lost 60 pounds. I was losing 10 pounds a month. And we didn't count calories. That's what was neat about it. We could eat all we wanted.
Press down on the palms alongside the body and lift the legs up to a 90-degree. But diet is just one part of what they promised to change when they joined the program. Exercise is another.
Yoga part of it, and I thought that was way out in left field someplace, and that was for a bunch of sissies down the road someplace, not me.
Hank, too, was skeptical at the beginning, but he soon got hooked on his results.
Every other doctor told me you can't reverse heart disease. According to the computer analysis, it was at least 10% better than it was before.
Dwayne also got hooked on his results.
I weigh now what I did when I graduated from high school. I feel probably as good as I did 20 years ago.
Is that the Italian shipment we were talking about? Yes, it was.
And then there's the third part, stress. Hank used to be an investment banker. He's pulled back now runs a furniture importing business with his wife. She says the Ornish program has saved both their lives.
I always felt responsible, and I always felt like I was pushing. And once we got into the group, that was all lifted from my shoulders, because it's not my responsibility anymore. It's his, and he's taking it on.
And we put this down. Let me help you first. Okay. Now, go ahead.
So after 40 years of marriage, Hank now shares in the cooking.
You used to be just afraid to do anything wrong. You're afraid of sex, you're afraid of exercising, you're afraid of... I'm not afraid anymore.
Not too fast.
Dwayne Butler still works in the trucking business, but says just being in the program has reduced his stress.
I don't orange scream like I used to. I don't manage under intimidation like I used to. At my job, I just, I think I'm a well-rounded person right now. The biggest relief I have is knowing that my heart is getting better and that I won't have to have a bypass. I won't have to have angioplasty.
Never expected to live beyond 59, and I'll be 65 October 15th. My grandchildren, I'm going to be at their weddings. So.
Hank has been in the program for just about 4 years, Dwayne for 2. Their stories and those of the 20 others in their group are in this just-published book. It's entitled Dr. Dean Ornish's Program for Reversing Heart Disease. And the book, by the way, contains some of the recipes.
Okay, so that's a clear picture then of people coming together in groups and helping each other. If we can do that online, great. If we can do it in this room, great. But the point is that not very many people learn and make these big changes alone. Some of the best helps that I have found is this example here, the Picture Perfect Weight Loss book by Dr. Howard Shapiro. And on the left, where his right hand is, there's a bagel with cream cheese. You see it? That has the same calories as the 5 containers of food on the right. So there are situations where things have the same calories, but they look different. And on the right side of the screen, we have similar food, fewer calories. At the top, there's a lamb shish kebab, contains lettuce there and tomato, and the lamb, 560 calories. And on the bottom is Dr. Furman's mushrooms, every other item there on the shish kebab, along with some seafood, and you've got the same lettuce and tomato, and that's 150 calories. But to the uneducated eye, it looks the same. So this is the kind of thing that we need to learn in the month-long or 2-month-long class on how to do this, because it's not that easy. Look at this example. Here is a Thanksgiving dinner, a holiday meal, 3,710 calories. And here is a Thanksgiving meal. Looks pretty good. It's got 2 little glasses of champagne and a glass of wine there on the right, and lots of other great food, 930 calories. So in our town, there's a group called Vegetarians in Motion. And about a week before Thanksgiving, they put on a holiday meal, and they show people how to eat tofurkey and other great foods that will make them healthy. So I think we need these kinds of aids in order to be able to learn it and to adopt it. So Let's look at a case study. 70-year-old woman with collagenous colitis, high blood pressure, elevated cholesterol, softening of the bones, and rapidly rising abnormal liver tests. Liver biopsy showed steatohepatitis, fatty liver that has developed a sort of an allergic reaction to the fat, an inflammatory reaction that can go on to cirrhosis. Fatty liver is the most common liver disease in America, and it is the most common, or it's the group of indications for liver transplant that's rising the most rapidly. She was overweight, 15%, a high-fat diet, inactive, on Mevacor and Diazide, Mevacor for her cholesterol, Diazide for blood pressure, potassium, K-dur, to replace the potassium lost by the Diazide, metoprolol for control of blood pressure, Pepsid to counteract the prednisone for her colitis, and Asacol for her colitis. She was told by me that she really needed to take the CHIP program that cost $300, and she said, I have no money, I cannot and will not do that. And I said, and by the way, you have this terrible liver disease, and you need to start on a drug, Actigol, that's not covered by Medicare, and it'll cost $300 a month. And you know what she said to that. So I was getting ready to leave and leave the door open that, if you change your mind, how I can help you, let me know. But I turned to her and I said, so what is it that you want? And she said, I want to visit my grandchildren. And I don't have the money to do that. I spend all my money on medication, and I don't feel good, and I've quit my job as a grocery clerk, and I've quit my job as secretary of the social club, and I sit at home and I'm dying, and I just want to see my grandchildren. I can't even send them presents at holiday times. So I said, well, what if we could teach you to eat and live differently, and your medicines would cost less or even go away, and then you could do this that you want to do? And she said, okay. I said, how about if you take the CHIP program? It only costs $300 once, not $300 a month. And she said, no, I can't do that. So we were about to have this stalemate again, and she said, doctor, could you just tell me what to do? See, there's still need for doctors. And I said, okay, how about if you eat oatmeal and fruit for breakfast and lentil soup and a salad with vegetables left over from the night before for lunch, and at supper time you eat 3 vegetables and whatever else you want. And then I was going to say, that's Monday. Now on Tuesday, and she said, thank you very much. And she came back in 3 months, had eaten that one set of meals for 3 months, and she was better. So I called the drug company and I told them, I have this patient that really needs this, send me some drug. They sent me a year free of Actigol, and we put her on the plant-based diet. She agreed to exercise, walking 30 minutes a day, and other things. So here's her labs. On the left side, we see alkaline phosphatase should be 125, it was 480. Gamma GT and AST and ALT are measures of inflammation in the liver. Look at that gamma GGT, 1,000 instead of 55. Her cholesterol was 160, should be 160 or less. It was 256 on medication. And her triglycerides should be 150, they were 189 on the medication. So where you see meds stopped in blue, that was after several series of repeat visits, and after coming off the medications, she had near normal lab results and was feeling better enough that she was returning to normal life. So liver tests normal, a year off Actigol, heartburn resolved to the point of having occasional Pepsid, blood pressure down to 1 pill a day instead of 4, cholesterol near normal off Mevacor, and collagenous colitis controlled on the Asacol, no more prednisone, and she's off 3/4 of her blood pressure pills and Mevacor and Actigol and Pepsid, and saving $5,800 a year in cash. Yeah. That is holistic gastroenterology, taking care of fatty liver and colitis in a way that improves overall health. So she could travel, she could buy gifts, she had less medicine and disease, her depression cleared, her energy returned, she went back to work as a grocery clerk. That was her support group, and she returned as secretary of her social club. The person that was filling in was very glad to give up that job. All right, let's turn to border security. Enough about that gut as gateway to cardiovascular disease. let's look at this immune system that we've been hearing so much about. We are a composite organism. I think we were convinced of that today, that bacteria are with us and they matter. We're 1/3 solids, 2/3 water. There are 100 times more bacterial cells than human cells in our composite body. And the DNA that we have in our cells is about 25,000 genes, and we need 100 times that amount at least in order to run the body. And it turns out that the bacteria that are with us and have grown up with us have actually taken over a lot of the functions. And we even learned that that bacteria can learn to reside in the body in various organs and actually function as a miniature organ inside our cells. So it's a win-win situation. Now, this is a complex diagram, but all I want you to do is look at the bottom of the slide and all those little boxes with words after them. Those all are family groups of bacteria. And the circles above them, you can read in the upper left it says nostril, and in the lower right circle it says knee crease. And at the top in the middle it says hair. And coming down the left side, second row, near the bottom, gut. There are bacteria everywhere on the human body, and research is going rampant now to figure out what they're doing and what disturbs them and what nourishes them. So this is studying the microbiome. So in the GI tract, we're now moving down to the small intestine in orange, and its job, as you learned earlier today, is to absorb everything and sort it out later. So there's a blood vessel that runs from the small intestine to the liver called the portal vein. It really acts like an artery because it's really carrying good stuff, but it's carrying all our drugs, all our food, all the stuff, the bacteria, things that we've absorbed that just get in. And then the liver acts as the central intelligence agency, and it may refer things to the spleen, it may send things to the lymph node for destruction, or it may excrete things out in the bile just to get rid of them, to dump them. But the small intestine is not real selective. Its job is to absorb everything. But in the colon, as we learned from David Montgomery, its job is to ferment the waste, to recycle water, and not recycle waste. Remember in high school biology class, we learned about a membrane that would allow solute to diffuse of one kind and not another, or it would allow water to diffuse and not the solute, whatever was dissolved in it. That was a semi-permeable membrane. Well, the colon is lined by one layer of cells, the enterocyte, which is a semi-permeable membrane. And here you see the bacteria at the top layer, all different kinds of bacteria, and then you see the cell, one cell layer. And remember that little blue spider-like cell, the dendritic cell he talked about? So it can grab a sample from the lumen and pull it down and analyze it and present it to the immune system for action. So this is a very complex system, but bacteria play a very important role. And the discussion we're about to have now, I would tell you, there's a book out there I saw on the tables that's called Rethink Food. Anybody see that book? Well, it's out there. And I have a little chapter in that on what we're going to talk about right now. Bacteria living in the GI tract, the good ones, require fiber as their food. Remember that? We learned that this morning. And when they digest fiber, they release butyric acid or butyrate. And that is the fuel, like most cells need glucose. These enterocytes that line the make the semi-permeable membrane of the colon, they require butyrate as a fuel if they are to maintain tight junctions between the cells. You see the little black dots between the cells? Those are tight junctions, some actually physical junction and some electrochemical gradient junction, like the two ends of the magnet that won't meet. Well, the two ends of the magnet that do meet help create that tight junction. It's maintained by cell activity that requires butyrate as fuel. So in order to have a lining that is not permeable to foreign material, you have to have food for the good bacteria. So that is the story in a nutshell, because you know that the immune system lines the GI tract. 70 to 80% of our immune system cells line the GI tract, protecting our borders from invasion as the world passes through us. You see the child crawling around on the floor? Everything they find, first they taste it. Even things they find on the dog, they want to taste. Because they're instructing their immune system what to be tolerant of. Their immune system has to learn what to tolerate and what not. So, here we see this one-cell layer in more detail, and I'm just showing you what you already heard today. Right in the middle, from microbes coming down, it says SCFA, short-chain fatty acids, butyrate. That goes to the cells, and that helps the cells be tight and not allow things to get through that will excite the immune system and set it off. Now, if we grow a new lining of our colon every 12 days, cells are sloughing off. They're disappearing into the milieu in the intestinal tract, and new cells are growing up and taking their place. What if there was no fiber and no bacteria and no butyrate, which happens when we don't eat right and take antibiotics and so on? Then you could leak a part of a colon lining cell through and come in contact with the T cells and B cells that line the GI tract, and they could recognize that as foreign because it is something they should never have seen. And if they make antibodies to that cell, then those antibodies scavenge around the body looking for some colon lining cells to attack as foreign. And if you get an antigen antibody complex from one of these foreign particles, it could be food particle, it could be bacterial particle, it could be cell particle, it could be a chemical particle. And if you get an antibody-antigen complex that gets carried around the body, it could set off a reaction in the nervous system, like multiple sclerosis, or in the connective tissue, like lupus. So, we're now realizing that the immune system can do friendly fire against different parts of the body based on the look-alike of whatever it's picked up on. So, we want to keep the cell membranes tight, and we want to have the immune system calm. On the lower left-hand corner, it says pro-inflammatory reactions. On the right-hand lower corner, anti-inflammatory reactions. And that's what we, in working with our gastrointestinal tract, are in charge of, but we didn't know it, and we didn't know how to do it. Now, the best book that I have found to explain this came out in 2013. I mean, this is new stuff. And it's by Susan Blum, and it's called Immune System Recovery Plan. And she has 3 chapters on what to do to get your gut healthy again, which is treating the root cause of so many of our chronic diseases, if not the whole thing, at least an important aspect of it. So here again, bacteria regulated by the immune system, and here we have immune response to the resident bacteria. So it works both ways because everything is a systems biology approach. It's complex and interrelated. And I think we learned enough about that. Now, I took care of patients with Crohn's disease. And by the way, it's spelled C-R-O-H-N. You have to move the H from where you'd want to put it to where it belongs at the end of the word. Crohn's disease, after Dr. Crohn. And this is an autoimmune inflammation of the GI tract because these things we just talked about are out of sync. So I would have my patients on an anti-inflammatory diet, on an omega-3 fatty acid supplement, either from fish oil or flax oil, walnuts and almonds, or sea algae, the DNA, now I've lost it. The component of omega-3s that we need the most is also in sea algae, which are actually plants. And I would have them get their vitamin D level up, and because that regulates the immune system, and have them use an anti-inflammatory herb like curcumin, and along with the traditional medications. And as their whole system improved, they would have less flares and less flares and less flares. And so what we have is not a battle between alternative medicine and conventional medicine, but begin to do our part. I cannot go home with these people and give them their medicine. I can't cook their breakfast or supper for them. They must do it themselves. So as you begin to take this on, you're not going against what your doctor's doing, you're just making it less and less necessary. And that actually then is a smooth transition if the physician is responsible to be a part of tapering the medications as they're no longer needed. So here is an example of care of Crohn's disease with a complementary medicine. Nutritionfacts.org is the website.
We know plant-based diets decrease markers of inflammation, but to see if plant-based diets decrease inflammation in a clinically relevant way, you've got to put it to the test. The gold standard for evidence in nutritional science is an interventional trial. You split people up into two groups, put half on one diet, half on the other, see what happens. Inflammatory bowel diseases, such as Crohn's disease, is an autoimmune condition where your immune system attacks your own intestines. There's no cure. All you can do is try to keep it in remission as long as possible between attacks. Sufferers are often put on anti-inflammatory and immunosuppressive drugs and may find themselves in and out of the hospital getting segments of their intestines surgically removed. Since it's the intestine itself that's inflamed, that would seem to be a good condition to test out the anti-inflammatory power of plant-based diets. We've known that meat, cheese, fish, animal protein in general has been found to increase risk of developing inflammatory bowel disease. But what about plants to not just prevent, but treat it? Japanese researchers took a group of Crohn's patients in remission, either because they just came out of surgery or they were able to beat it back with steroids, and for 2 years asked half of them to eat a semi-vegetarian diet, meaning in this case vegetarian, except for half a serving of fish a week and a half a serving of other meat once every 2 weeks. But otherwise, they were supposed to eat vegetarian, less than 1 serving of meat per week. Now, this wasn't a prison study or anything. They were free-living adults. So the results are not necessarily what happens when Crohn's sufferers actually go on a plant-based diet, but what happens when people are just told to eat a plant-based diet, and how much they comply is up to them, which makes the results even more astounding. Check this out. The dashed line is the standard diet group. The solid line is the semi-veg. 200 days into the study, all the patients told to eat more of a plant-based diet are still in remission. But about 20% of the group not told to eat anything different relapsed. After a year, 100% of the semi-veg group still symptom-free, but the disease reemerged in half of the standard diet group. And at the end of 2 years, 92% of the patients told to eat a more plant-based diet remained without disease, whereas the majority of those not given that advice relapsed back into cycles of drugs, hospitalizations, and surgery. A highly significant finding. And that horrible relapse rate is typical on typical diets. Most Crohn's sufferers relapse within a year or two. Yet, the semi-vegetarian diet was highly effective in preventing relapse in Crohn's disease. Remission rate, meaning disease-free status, with the semi-vegetarian diet was 100% at 1 year and 92% at 2 years. This is the best result in relapse prevention. To the best of the researchers' knowledge, this is the best result in relapse prevention ever reported.
Yeah. A shout out to Dr. Michael Grieger. He reads 8,000 articles a year. Those that are ready for prime time, this is just on nutrition science. He puts into a 3-minute video referenced for scholars and in the language of the lay public, and it's all free at nutritionfacts.org. And you can sign up for the daily video, or you can go to the left-hand side of the website, and by clicking on the alphabet, if you want to look up proteins, you can click on P. If you want to look up cancer, click on C, and there's 1,800 videos that you can review. Michael Grieger, but it's nutritionfacts.org. So we have the same story here. At the top of the picture there, you see the burger, and the antibiotics and infections, and at the bottom you see colon cancer. So it's not within the range of this talk to cover that topic, but remember that Dean Ornish was reversing prostate cancer with the same program, so it's no surprise. If we look at the fiber content of foods, we're really looking at phytochemicals, aren't we? We learned that. And if you look at the left-hand side, foods contain various amounts of fiber or phytonutrients, and the animal foods on the right, 0. How do you know if you're getting enough fiber? If you don't know how to calculate 35 grams or more a day, just wait until you look in the mirror and you look like this. That's enough fiber. And here we are with a summary. This comes out of our classes for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. They keep a diary and they try and record the number of colors they've eaten in their foods, what foods have that color, and what active substances are in those foods. And so this list of rules on the left-hand side is what we already know. We need to have our diet to be anti-inflammatory, anticoagulant, not viscous, but dilute, antioxidant, and acid or alkaline. And plant foods do all of that for us. This stable environment in the GI tract's intestinal bacteria group is responsible for upregulating, downregulating inflammation. Inflammation is usually physiologic and controlled. On the left-hand side, we see that with normal physiology in the gut-brain axis is in balance. But if we get an unstable environment, altered bacteria, incremental increase in inflammation, we can get an altered mental status or brain function. It can work in reverse. Stress and altered brain function can change physiology in the gut such that it is hospitable to a different set of bacteria. So it works either way. So this integration of the brain with the gut-brain axis and the bacteria is very important, and you'll see much more research coming out about this, the role of the microbiome in affecting neurodegenerative diseases. Just like Susan Blum has written a book about healing immune system diseases, there are books now starting to come out with an introduction to healing neurodiseases. And of course, in the stress's effect on the body, we have two nervous systems, the sympathetic nervous system, which is represented on the left side of the screen, and on the right side is the parasympathetic nervous system. That's when we're relaxed and happy. And left is when we're on or up against it or having difficulties. And just notice the effect on eyes and saliva and heart and lungs and stomach and liver. In each nervous system, the effect is the exact opposite. See the pluses and minuses? So we need to develop skills that take us from living in our parasympathetic, on guard, ready for a fight nervous system to a more peaceful, ready to negotiate and spend most of the day enjoying our lives kind of nervous system. And the Ornish program teaches that as one of the 4 pillars of their intervention. And here's the Immune System Recovery Plan by Susan Blum. And now we go to the final group, our genetic destiny. In what way is the gut a gateway to altering our genetic destiny? Remember the Time magazine cover from January of 2010? Why your DNA isn't your destiny? The new science of epigenetics reveals how the choices we make can change our genes and those of our kids. Wow, that's a headful, as all new information is. And I have to drill down and see what that means. I thought it was just bad genes. The mother gives me a set of cards, my dad gives me a set of cards, and I have to play the cards I'm dealt. When we had Dr. Deal in Rockford, Illinois, teaching the CHIP program, we would say, no, you can ask for a redeal. Sorry, yeah. So, back to this tree diagram. Fundamental clinical imbalances like upregulated inflammatory responses, and be connected to our protection and defense system, which is turned into a leaky gut because we don't eat right, we kill off our good bacteria with antibiotics, we don't replace them, and we don't provide butyrate to the lining cells. And that relates to this fact that our genes are turned off, all of them, 95% of the time. And they get turned on from cell signaling from food. Food can act as a cell signal. From bacteria, which can act as a cell signal. From stress and hormone action that can act as cell signaling. So, as we work our way down to the root cause of disease, we do have a genetic predisposition, but it is modifiable in the roots, as we learned from another shout out for David Montgomery. We learned that the microorganisms, radiation, nutrients, trauma, physical activity, psychosocial stress, all these things can be root causes of these changes. A refresher course now on genetics. Everybody knows about the double helix design of our DNA. Sequencing of human DNA was celebrated a decade ago, and we'll cover that. And genomics is the study of genetic expression, but the epigenome on top of the genes modulates or alters the rate of their being turned on or turned off, and they're mostly turned off. Here's Watson and Crick in 1962. I graduated from high school in 1962 and learned that what I had learned earlier in biology wasn't all correct. They're receiving the Nobel Prize in Medicine for that discovery. I believe that one day Dean Ornish will be nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine if I have to do it myself. Francis Collins, who's the director of the NIH right now, the National Institutes of Health, running all of our nationally sponsored research, was the director of the Human Genome Project from 1990 to 2003, finding out that we have about 25,000 genes in our 23 pairs of chromosomes. And if we look at the nucleus of a cell, remember that from high school biology? A cell, and it's got that black dot in the middle, well, in this case a red dot with a blue center. Inside there, if you look closer, are the blue dots, which are the coiled up chromosomes, the chromatin material. Now hang on to your hat. If we pulled out one of those blue dots, you can see the double helix coiled up in there. How long do you think it is? 3 meters. Imagine something as long as a yardstick coiled up in a dot that you can see under the microscope in the center of a human cell. To manipulate a gene within that 3-meter long set of chromosomes, you would have to have special tools, nanotools, histones, and chaperones. How does that work? If we uncoil a chromosome, the first coil looks like a telephone cord. Remember those old telephone cords that would pull out halfway across the room? And if we look at that closely, it uncoils into the double helix. And if we look at that closely, we come to this series of circles, and you see a little red segment in one of these blue circles with a purple lining edge onto it. That little red segment is a gene, and it is inactive unless it is acted upon by a histone or some other mechanism that causes it to become uncoiled, and that little red segment is then free and out in the open. You see that on the right-hand side of the screen? It's uncoiled, and there's that string with the red section open. That's when a gene is active. And so these things can get turned on and turned off. In the upper left corner, it says epigenetic mechanisms, development in the uterus and childhood, environmental chemicals, drugs and pharmaceuticals, aging and diet. And it can affect, on the right-hand upper corner, health endpoints, cancer, autoimmune disease, mental disorders, diabetes, and so on. So we need to drill down further and know how all of this works. And some of you might ask, what does it have to do with the GI tract? Well, we're going to go to a researcher at a major university center. Here she is with her dog, and let her help us understand how it works.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dana Dolinoy, a postdoctoral research fellow in the laboratory of Randy Girdle at Duke University. In our laboratory, we study epigenetic gene regulation, or how environmental exposures interact with the epigenome to affect long-term health and disease. So today I'd like to introduce you to two agouti mice, and as you can see, the yellow mouse is quite obese, and she is also prone to diabetes and cancer. But on the other hand, the brown mouse remains slender and lean, and also has a lower risk of developing disease. But what's really amazing about these two mice are that they are genetically identical. They are two identical twin sisters from the same mother. So what makes them look so different? It turns out that there is a second genome called the epigenome. Epigenome literally means in addition to or above the genome. And while the recently completed Human Genome Project identified approximately 25,000 genes, these genes still need instructions for what to do and when to do it and where to do it. And that's where the epigenome comes into play. A useful analogy is to think of the epigenome as the software that directs the genomic hardware of a computer. All of our cells contain the same DNA and genes, but it is the epigenome that decides how these genes are expressed and determines how a cell becomes a heart cell, a liver cell, or even a hair cell. Epigenetics consists of molecular switches and markers, such as DNA methylation, that help control gene regulation, in which a quartet of atoms, called a methyl group, attaches to DNA and shuts down genes. And as you can see, the red balls here are attaching to the DNA and turning off the gene. So back to the agouti sisters. In the yellow obese mouse, the agouti gene is unmethylated and turned on all the time, while in the brown mouse, the gene is completely methylated and shut down. There are also other mice that appear mottled, in which half of the cells are methylated and shut down, and the other half are unmethylated and turned on, and these mice appear to be yellow and brown. So the coat colors of these agouti mice acts like a sensor for the amount of DNA methylation present. We use the agouti mice to study how maternal nutrients and environmental factors affect the epigenome. Specifically, we wanted to know whether a mom's exposure to a contaminant found everywhere in the environment can alter the fetal epigenome and eventually the long-term fate of her offspring. In this study, pregnant mothers were exposed to a common chemical found in certain plastics. This chemical is called bisphenol A, or BPA for short, and it's present in many commonly used products, including food and beverage containers, baby bottles, dental sealants, and the lining of food cans. About 4 years ago, the CDC studied approximately 400 people, and in 95% of these 400 people, they measured detectable levels of bisphenol A. And when we fed the pregnant mothers, the mice, BPA, we noticed that the number of offspring with the yellow obese coat color increased dramatically. And we also saw that maternal exposure to this chemical decreased DNA methylation in the offspring and turned this agouti gene on when it is supposed to be off. So we started a second study in which pregnant mothers were exposed to BPA plus nutritional supplementation such as methyl donors like folic acid, or genistein, which is a common ingredient found in soy products. The level of soy that we provided is similar to what a person who eats a high soy diet or an individual living in Asia might eat. And once we did this, we observed that the offspring were no longer predominantly yellow and more obese, and that there were more offspring with the slender brown coat color phenotype. This indicates that maternal nutrient supplementation can counteract the negative effects of exposure to that chemical. Additional thinking about human health and disease is that it is affected by genetics and the environment. And whenever identical twins have different disease status, this was often attributed to the environment or different behavioral choices such as smoking status. But with epigenetic gene regulation, we can see that we can no longer say whether genetics or the environment have a bigger impact.
So, the upshot of all of this is that the genetic code is a gift from the past, but we can modify the gift during our lifetime And during pregnancy, procreation, we have the chance to give our children a switch setting that is more advantageous. As you will see in this study on the left, the mother rat is eating her high-fat meal. And in the womb, the infant is being affected at chromosome 3 with an increase in proliferation or neurogenesis of certain cells, more than would be generated in a healthy diet. And that causes, as the cells migrate to their location of activity, increased peptide expression in the brain that governs or does switch settings for the activity of the offspring. So at weaning, the adolescent offspring has elevated blood lipids, increased food intake, a fat preference, early puberty, and increased body weight. So we begin to see how the gut is a gateway to altering genetic expression to the degree that it's in our control. And if we look at infants, humans, if they have a vaginal delivery, they're going to have a predominance of lactobacillus, you see down the list there. If they have a cesarean delivery, different bacteria will dominate. And with breastfeeding, you're going to have Bifidobacter dominance, and with bottle feeding, a different set of bacteria. So we set children up early on, whether if we put them on a brand new carpet, and then we get a baby blanket out of the dryer and put it down so they're not exposed to the dirt on the carpet, and then we don't let them have a dog, we deny the training of the immune system. And if the switch settings are off in the beginning, then it's really a lot of work to get them reset as opposed to the way we grew up in nature. Now, I'm not an expert in all of this, but this was published in the American Journal of Gastroenterology, so I guess I better keep up on it. But these are the kinds of things that we need to be tracking now in order to do our work of being educated, experienced, and as Olson said, Gwen Olson, become an agitator for support for change in these systems. Lean mice have one kind of bacteria, obese mice another kind of bacteria. Low-fat, high polysaccharide, carbohydrate diet nourishes one type of bacteria, the Western diet, a different kind of bacteria, and we now know that it makes a difference. I would ask you, particularly you who are in medical practice in some way, the special issue of the Journal of Gastroenterology 1 year ago this month, May 2014, the entire issue is on the gut microbiome in health and disease. And my thanks to them for help in preparing this talk. And again, a shout out to Susan Bloom. And finally, self-care checklist, what I've come to support. Stop the whites, white flour, white rice, white sugar, high fructose corn syrup. Avoid junk foods. Read the labels. Look for chemicals, dyes, anything that you can't pronounce. It's not good. Change sugar drinks to tea and water, and occasionally beer. Eat plant foods as grown, seasonal, and organic. Do you know, we learned a little bit of this from David Montgomery today about plants having their defense systems, and if we eat seasonal plants in our region, they help defend us against things that we need to be defended against in our region in that season. And the same with local honey. The honeybees sampling the flowers in the region where we live are going to produce a honey that is important to us in our immune system. 45 grams of fiber a day, I usually say 35. I don't know how that slipped in there. Omega-3 fatty acids, and if you want to be all plant-based, then sea algae, DHA, is a great source. Limit caffeine, alcohol, meats, particularly cured meats, walk 10,000 steps a day, or other exercise. Develop a stress management skill so that you can convert yourself from living in your sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight response, to living in your calm and negotiating and loving and appreciating nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system. Develop or spend time with people who make you feel good. When you spend time with people that make you feel bad, that's a toxicology in our environment. And so we can do that. And adopt You know, we're getting back to farm to table, regional food. Let's go one step further, as we learned from earlier lecture, become an earth to ecology to farm to table, and that will take you all the way to health and vitality. A shout out to all these people that took me from a traditional physician who wanted to be a researcher and a clinician and a teacher to a holistic gastroenterologist. There they are, and I've added Joel Furman and David Montgomery because they became on that list today. Thank you very much.